Hey guys, I'm making this video right now because we are not going to be able to have class tomorrow. I know you're very disappointed about that, and I'm sorry. But I think that this video should fill the profound absence that you may have in your heart as a result of this missing 50 minutes. So here's what I want to talk about. We ended last class with the quote on page 65 from the Discourse on the Origin of Inequality. I will read it again to you, although I am sure that you have your book in hand. So this is on page 65, about 8 lines from the bottom of the page. He writes, "For the vices that make social institutions necessary are the same ones that make their abuses inevitable." All right, so this is essentially the basis of his critique of civil society, namely that there are vices which, first of all, make civil society necessary. What does that mean? Well, it means in part that civil society is not the project of a number of very progressive individuals who come together because they think they can do something even better. It's the opposite. It's the fact that civil society is trying to solve a problem, and that problem is the war of all against all. I made a reference to this in class last time, and then I've made a class reference to it in other classes. Bellum omne contras omnem. I may have done some violence to the Latin there, but it means war of all against all. And this is what Hobbes describes the state of nature as. You'll recall that Thomas Hobbes, is one of the people that Rousseau is responding to at various points in the discourse, because you have read the text so carefully. There is a war of all against all. That is to say that each individual is, for the sake of what goods he and his family may have, in competition and in conflict with other families or individuals or clans. And so this is a very unstable time. Thank you for asking that question, so-and-so. Yes, it is a very good question. Why is this an unstable time? Well, we know that beginning with natural society, there was a stirring of pride in this individual who started to see himself and these animals and others, and he started to draw comparisons. And he started to say, well, I'm faster, I'm wiser, I'm more clever than these other animals. And this was the first stirring of pride, and we talked about that passage back on page such and such, 46? Yes, 46. So pride is one of the important first conditions that starts to make individuals think about themselves and think about themselves apart from others. So they start to have a sense of self, and as a result of that, they in turn start to eventually develop some sort of egocentrism. This is heightened when, in the first natural society, people are living, say, with one another in these kind of family groups, and there's a division of labor there. Right, the original division of labor, which he talks about, again, this is on the top of page 48, is between men and women. The men are the hunters and gatherers, and the women are staying at home and, playing with their iPhone and creating dinner and whatnot. That division of labor is going to then be reflected repeatedly when we have something like public esteem. What public esteem means is that I suspect, or I think that I should be treated in a certain way because of the importance of the job that I'm performing. So I'm a hunter-gatherer. I'm the one who goes and gets the food for us to eat. So what I do is very, very important, and I demand the amount of respect that corresponds to that. So I demand to be treated that way, and I will, in turn, treat those who don't perform the job that I do with less respect. Natural society makes a large leap towards civil society when human beings develop metallurgy and agriculture. And you again recall this is on page 51. And the important thing about that is that the division of labor that we already saw between men and women is now increasingly complicated. So now there are men who are hunters and gatherers. Now there are men who are going to be making blades or hoes or forks. And there are going to be those that are growing the wheat and the soybeans. And the value of each of those products is going to reflect the worth that each person thinks that he has. Any questions so far? I can't answer the question. Sorry. The other thing that I said yesterday, which I want to emphasize again, is that there are these needs that go along with the public esteem that in turn is only heightened by the division of labor. So people have increasing needs because they in turn are doing smaller and smaller portions of what generations before them their ancestors had done. So they are, for example, eating vegetables that are already refined, that have been picked, and these are things which they didn't do at other times because before they were merely hunters and gatherers. Similarly, they are clothing themselves in certain ways. Probably the most important one, of course, for Rousseau is the fact that they need other people, right? They want to be around them. Not only do they need them for the material conditions of their existence, they also need them for their own sense of self, right? They fall in love with them. They develop profound friendships. They develop enmities. They even need hatreds. I think that's probably true, that you can need a hatred as much as you might be able to need a love. That's interesting. For Rousseau, these are all going to be effects of property. He says as much as this on page 54, the end of the paragraph that begins on that page, where he writes, all these ills are the first effect of property and the inseparable offshoot of incipient inequality. Now, he's talking about property right now, but technically the property that he's talking about is not yet instituted by law. That will only occur with the creation of civil society. Right now, it's a property that one possesses as a result of one's labor, that one has to constantly keep an eye over to make sure others are not somehow appropriating his product. But as a result of that, he says, this is on top of page 55, the paragraph that begins on page 55, thus, when both the most powerful or the most miserable made of their strength or their needs a sort of right to another's goods, equivalent, according to them, to the right of property, the destruction of equality was followed by the most frightful disorder. This is what I meant before when I talked about the war of all against all. Okay, so we have the war of all against all. We understand all of that. So let's talk about the origin of civil society. he starts talking about the origin of civil society on page 56, and the things that he says there are, that we create civil society in order to provide some greater protection and security to all of those who, up until this point, are always worried that someone might steal their things. And as he puts it on page 56, it's those that are more wealthy that have more to lose and who are the ones who promote this project, whereas those who are weaker may come together because, of course, as he says at one point, wealth and poverty are in some ways equivocal with strength and weakness. So he knows that those people who are wealthy are stronger and can offer some greater protection. But the reason why the rich man wants to join with the weaker man is so that he can at least have some sort of rules that he knows that this weaker man is not in turn trying to steal from him. So they come together and they create a civil society. It is a social contract. That means that there is some consensus involved. And this point is really, really important. I think that I've emphasized this in the past, but let me do that again. The reason why Locke and Rousseau and others are talking about a social contract is because they are claiming that it is not the case civil society begins with something like paternal power, which is an archetype for monarchy. It's not the case that civil society begins as a result of arbitrary power or something like might makes right. So it's not the case that the most powerful is the one who, through violence, in turn creates a society. So Locke and Rousseau are both critiquing this. Locke, because he thinks that in the state of nature, we're actually, intelligent beings, and the state of nature, or the law of nature, according to Locke, means the law of reason. Whereas Rousseau's saying something quite contrary, because he thinks that reason is pernicious. Reason leads to egocentrism. Egocentrism leads to this demand for public esteem, alienation from others, and in turn, this profound enmity between individuals, between those who have and those who have not. So, but both Rousseau and Locke agree that it must have come about through some sort of social contract. And